Hello and welcome back to Wreaking More Joy. I'm Janet Dalgleish, and in this season, Rekindle, we're exploring how women can rebuild a joyful, sustainable relationship with our purpose and the ways we express it through our working lives. In the last episode, we spent time with Saturn. In fact, the last couple of episodes, we spent time with Saturn, the planet of structure, focus, and chosen limits. And we talked about self-authored constraint, when it's self-directed, can be a potent foundation piece for liberation and joy. Today, we're meeting Saturn's cosmic counterpart, Jupiter, and everything that that represents in our psyche. The brain is a prediction machine. Its primary job is to keep us alive, and it does that by anticipating what comes next based on what has come before. So our brain, your brain, is constantly scanning and assessing and evaluating at a very fast pace in order to predict what happens next. Your brain is constantly asking, what usually happens here? What's the pattern? What should I expect? And this is incredibly useful for survival if the answers are things like lions attack in this locality, or at this season, berries are usually ripe and ready for eating. But it means that your brain and mine have a strong bias towards the familiar. From a neurological perspective, what has happened before feels inherently safer, even when we consciously or intellectually know that that's not necessarily true. So there's a distinction between what we're consciously aware of and what we intellectually know, and how our brains sometimes feel about things. Novelty carries more risk, or the perception of risk. Known pathways feel easier to tread. So left to their own devices, our brains naturally tend to plan futures that look like slightly modified versions of the past. And this is Saturn territory. Saturn represents structure, continuity, responsibility, sequence. Saturn basically says, let's build on what already exists. Let's not miss a step. Let's honor precedent. Let's proceed carefully. And that aligns beautifully with the left brain. Now, when I talk about left brain, right brain, I just want to little sidebar here to say this is a kind of semi-metaphorical model we're talking about. We know now that we all use both sides of our brains to do a bunch of different stuff. But this left brain, right brain model is quite familiar to many of us, and it's a useful analogy for the different ways of operating in the world. So Saturn aligns with this left brain stuff, which is logic and logistics, linear thinking, sequential thinking, superb attention to detail, evaluation, accountability, and a strong sense of cause and effect. And in a culture that prizes productivity, efficiency, and risk management, Saturn thinking is rewarded early and often. We are often taught, both explicitly and implicitly, that good planning means extrapolating from past data, proving that our ideas will work before we begin, minimizing uncertainty, staying legible and sensible and responsible and logical. Now, as we explored in episode 1 of this season, when we are feeling this sense of having lost the joyful spark, the inspiration, the passion that originally existed with our purpose in the world, when it feels like it's become drudgery or it's become dull or unsatisfying, that doesn't mean something is broken. It often means, usually means, that there is something inside that wants to evolve but can't, for a whole variety of different reasons. And this is where Jupiter comes in. Jupiter represents the part of our psyche that knows how to ask, what if the future doesn't look like the past at all? Or what if the future doesn't look like the past in the way that I've unconsciously thought it might have to? So neurologically, Jupiter maps onto this kind of right brain function. So it's a splendid helper for things like creativity, inspiration, visionary perspectives, playfulness, imagination, big sky dreaming, intuition, insight, lateral problem solving, connecting to the fields of infinite possibility with a sense that we can just leapfrog ahead. We don't need to care about the details. Jupiter doesn't care about the details. Saturn loves the details. Jupiter has no interest in predictive loops, and it really likes to jump over all the minutiae to get to whatever it is that is the exciting thing that lies beyond the known horizon. Jupiter doesn't plot things out. Jupiter envisions the done deal. And that distinction matters deeply for women whose working lives have been shaped inside systems that limited what was possible for us, whether directly or indirectly, and trained us to kind of plan like the accountants of our own lives, measuring everything according to a set of known parameters. We have been encouraged to ask, what's realistic? What am I already good at or already known for? Where have I already invested my time, energy, and money? What is sensible? What is proven? What can I justify? These are all Saturn questions, and they can be really useful in many, many contexts, of course. But they're incomplete, and they are not the place to start our own evolution into whatever is next for us, because the answers to each of these questions lives in the past. They are based on assumptions about the future based on the past. So these questions set us up for a future that is almost indistinguishable from the past. And so no wonder our evolution can get sticky or feel blocked. Jupiter asks questions that feel riskier because they don't rely on precedent, but they also feel juicier. So what could things look like if I skipped the how for now and just imagine the end result? What future feels meaningful, not just manageable? What would I most want here, even if I didn't believe it could happen, or I don't know how it could happen? And for women in particular, Jupiter energy is often suppressed early. We hear things like, you're too imaginative, be more sensible, more realistic, and don't take risks because you can't be trusted. Don't do magical thinking. There's a really well-known and probably apocryphal story attributed to Henry Ford where it is said that he commented, if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. Whether anyone said that or not, the insight is really good. Saturn says, build a faster horse because that's all he knows. Jupiter says, maybe create something new that hasn't existed before. He has no attachment to the idea of horses. He doesn't know if they're even the right framework, so he can have fun thinking about what could take their place. And of course, you don't have to be a Henry Ford to experience some Jupiter inspiration. You don't have to be on this big global stage. You don't have to invent the machinery for an accessible automobile or create the next big thing in Silicon Valley or cure cancer overnight. We're not talking about that. All you have to do is make space for your next evolution, knowing and trusting that when you explore your inspiration, you will inevitably come up with something that is unique to you, and that makes it original. It makes it glorious. Because when women lose touch with that Jupiter energy, our work can become dutiful and worthy and responsible, and it might stay meaningful, but it's not joyful. In fact, it can really become boring or dry or effortful or frustrating. So Jupiter reconnects us to our capacity for big dreams, adventure, possibility, play, meaning that stretches us. And it asks, what kind of future would feel expansive to my nervous system? Not impressive, not respectable, expansive. And before you throw a shoe at my head for implying anything like you might have to do more, that is not what I mean by expansive. Expansive doesn't automatically mean bigger. I know it sounds like it does, but we can reframe it to mean more authentically you. So we can actually expand into something that feels smaller, if small feels juicy and delicious and wonderful. So this is the evolution that I talked about in the very first episode of this season, Rekindle, this evolution deep within that's yearning to be expressed, but somehow got stuck somewhere along the line. Not because of anything you did wrong, but just because of how our system kind of mistrains us for this work. So the evolution might look like scaling up and getting bigger, like hair care product mogul, Madam C.J. Walker. Or it might look like pivoting into a whole new direction, like skater turned fashionista Vera Wang. Or it might look like quietly going even deeper and deeper into your chosen field, not taking yourself out into big spaces, but focusing in, like genius choreographer Martha Graham. This is why Jupiter energy often feels inspiring and alive and even exhilarating. Jupiter reminds us that a purpose is not meant to be static, but nor is it meant to be a sentence. It's meant to be a seductive and beautiful horizon that calls us forward. So here's how these two seeming opposites work best as a partnership, because we need them both. There's very often in astrological language, the language of symbols in astrology, we come across things that seem like binaries. And we are so well trained for binary thinking, it's either this or it's this, that it can be tricky to kind of navigate. And for my money, the joy lives in finding the third dimension where all things are possible and looking at how they work together. What do these two apparently very different characters have in common? And what they have in common, of course, is they are wanting to support us. And here's how they work together really well. This is my favorite metaphor for this. So imagine that you are in the foothills of a mountain range and you're looking up at the mountains above you, kind of going, ooh, I wonder which one I want to climb. Now, if you were looking at this through a Saturn lens, if you were leading with Saturn energy, the way we're all used to doing, you look for the one that has the most obvious, easy-looking path, the one that's got an already made trail, the one that's got convenient signs for hikers, this way to climb a mountain. But if you lead with Jupiter, you look at the mountains and you look at the summits and you pick the summit that you think looks the most exciting. That's the one I want to stand on up there. The view's going to be amazing from there. The vegetation looks really interesting. I really love the look of that. And then you ask Saturn to help you figure out how to make the climb. So Jupiter needs to be invited in first. So we begin with the vision unimpeded by all those old experiences, all those old limits around what is sensible or practical or realistic. And then genius Saturn comes in to help build a structure that supports the genuinely new. I use this whole metaphor to reflect upon the famous quote from Joseph Campbell, a student of Jung's. He said, if you can see your path laid out in front of you step by step, you know it's not your path. Your own path you make with every step you take. That's why it's your path. It's this quality of trailblazing. You can't blaze someone else's trail and they can't blaze yours. Jupiter helps us decide where we want the path to take us, the destination, because Jupiter is eager for that place beyond the known. Saturn helps us build the path step by step because he wants to squeeze every drop of experience along the way. That's why he loves the details, because they're juicy. So here is a gentle practice for you to play with this week. Ask yourself, if I had a brain that didn't assume that the future had to look like the past, what possibility would open up? Notice what your brain does when you contemplate that question. There's no right or wrong here, and whatever you notice happening is not a problem or a sign of something broken. It is just useful data. Notice any urge to shut this radical idea down. That's your brain leaning into the familiar Saturn energy, because that's how it's been trained to operate, as we all have. It's not bad, but it's not going to necessarily lead you anywhere new. Notice any sparkles of glee at the concept itself. It might feel a bit mischievous or a bit radical or a bit like, ooh, could I really do that? That's your Jupiter-oriented internal inspiration. So thank it. Thank you, Jupiter, in me. And then let Jupiter have a little more airtime. You don't need to act on anything. You don't need a plan. You don't need proof. You're just letting the horizon widen. You might find yourself deciding that this is a good time to open up to possibility, not to run amok and burn everything down in a firestorm of excitement, but to quietly sit and let the vision emerge. Give it space and time to come fully forth, to let itself be known to you. After the vision, that's when Saturn is invited back into the room to contribute his part. So last episode, we talked about the idea of liberation through your own self-authored constraint. When you invite Jupiter to help you decide on the direction and intention of that constraint so that Saturn knows what he's building, that's the truly sweet spot. Jupiter helps us imagine what could be. Saturn helps us honor what's gone before and build what's next. He's the connection between the two. And together they become a power team to support you creating the next phase of your working life to be not only stable, but also spacious, joyful, and sovereign. Thank you for spending this time with me. Until next time, let yourself imagine beyond precedent. Begin to trust your visions, even if you have no idea how they'll emerge. And remember, the future is not obliged to resemble the past. I would love to hear about any wild inspiration that lights you up when you let your Jupiter speak freely. So do please share in the comments if you'd like. There is nothing off limits.